I want you to imagine, just for a second, trying to explain the modern boutique gym to a hunter-gatherer from maybe 50,000 years ago.
Oh, man. They would think we were completely out of our minds.
Right? I mean, picture it. You pull this ancient human forward in time and you show them a room packed with people voluntarily paying, I don't know, a couple $100s a month to run in place on a motorized rubber belt.
Staring at a little glowing screen while they do it.
Exactly. And lifting heavy chunks of iron just to put them back down exactly where they found them, and sweating profusely in this, climate-controlled box.
It would look like some sort of bizarre, punishing cult to them.
It really would, because for hundreds of thousands of years, physical movement wasn't an industry. It wasn't like a choice you made. It was just called Tuesday.
Right, it was just surviving.
Yeah. Yet today, something so deeply embedded in our DNA, something so fundamentally natural, has morphed into this multi-billion-dollar complex. I mean, it is saturated with wearables and algorithmic optimization, hyper-specific footwear, and just an overwhelming deluge of conflicting information.
A lot of noise.
So much noise. Why is the simple act of inhabiting a human body now so incredibly complicated?
Well, I mean, it's the ultimate evolutionary mismatch, isn't it? We have essentially engineered our physical environment to eliminate the necessity of movement altogether.
We really have.
We don't have to chase our food down anymore. We push a button on a piece of glass, and a stranger just leaves it at our front door.
It's crazy when you put it like that.
And we don't have to build our shelters from scratch every night either. So because we've successfully stripped all the physical friction out of our daily survival, we find ourselves in this strange historical paradox.
Which is what, exactly?
Well, we are now forced to artificially re-inject physical stress back into our lives just to keep our biological machinery from, deteriorating.
Ah, I see.
And because we live in a hyper-commodified society, that artificial stress has been packaged, branded, and sold back to us. That commodification naturally breeds noise.
Oh, absolutely.
It thrives on creating these artificial complexities just to sell you a solution. It breeds the anxiety that you are, quote-unquote, moving wrong, or that you need the latest proprietary sensor to finally move right.
Exactly. And cutting through that manufactured noise is our primary mission today. So we are taking a deep dive into what might seem, at first glance anyway, like an unlikely piece of source material for a philosophical discussion on fitness.
Unlikely, but brilliant.
Yeah. It's a transcript from a show called Pod Zone, featuring two speakers, David and Alice. Now, Pod Zone is formally structured as an advanced English language learning tool.
Right, for non-native speakers trying to reach that C2 fluency level.
Yeah, exactly. But what happens in this specific conversation is just extraordinary. They aren't just trading tips on how to, optimize a deadlift or arguing about protein powders.
No, it goes way deeper than that.
Way deeper. They end up systematically dissecting the philosophy, the underlying psychology, and the specific lexicon of modern physical movement. It's really a linguistic and anatomical breakdown of what it actually means to consciously move a body in the 21st century.
Which is exactly what makes this transcript such a goldmine for us. I mean, we aren't here today to spoon-feed you a 12-week hypertrophy template or, debate the perfect macro split.
Right, there are plenty of places to get that.
Assuming you've been around the block a few times, you already know the mechanical basics of what to do in a gym. Our goal is to elevate the discourse. We're going to extract the advanced concepts from this conversation to help you transcend that rudimentary, transactional, I have to go work out mentality.
Yeah, we want to move past that.
We're looking at the architecture of a sustainable, lifelong practice. We want to arm you with the precise vocabulary and the mental frameworks required to navigate not just the gym floor, but the actual reality of aging, adaptation, and maintaining a high quality of physical existence.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because to properly engage with this material, we need to completely reset the aesthetic we usually associate with fitness. So, wipe the sweaty gym floors, the neon lights, and the blaring EDM from your mind.
Good riddance.
Yeah, right? If we are going to treat this with the intellectual rigor it deserves, we need a different setting entirely.
Okay, so imagine instead a massive, quiet study, a floor-to-ceiling bookshelf. On the left side, you have dense, uncompromising medical texts. Think Gray's Anatomy, massive atlases of the musculoskeletal system, detailed schematics of the central nervous system, textbooks on cellular metabolism.
Sounds intense.
It is. But right next to them, on the right side of the shelf, you have the great philosophical treatises. You have Seneca, Marcus Aurelius, essays on existentialism, texts exploring the human condition, mindfulness, and the nature of suffering.
Oh, I love this visual.
We are operating exactly at the intersection of those two shelves. We're exploring where the brutal mechanical reality of human biology collides with the philosophical why of our existence.
And what's really fascinating is that the speakers in the Pod Zone transcript, David and Alice, organically arrive at that exact intersection just by tracing their own personal histories.
Yeah, they do.
They both describe a very familiar, almost universal evolution in how they have approached their own bodies over time. They look back at their early 20s and they recognize that their entire philosophy of movement was completely hijacked by high-impact, high-intensity workouts driven purely by aesthetics.
It's all about the mirror in your 20s.
It really is. It was all external. It was entirely about constructing a very specific, visually validated image of themselves to present to the world.
And it's an incredibly common starting line. That early phase is almost always defined by external validation and driven by an intense volume of physical stress.
Definitely.
The goal isn't to build a capable machine. The goal is to sculpt a specific silhouette. And frankly, the body is so resilient in its 20s that it will tolerate an absurd amount of punishment, poor biomechanics, and insufficient recovery just in the pursuit of that aesthetic.
It just bounced back.
You do. You can force the adaptation through sheer willpower and biological youth.
It reminds me less of biology and more of, bad software engineering.
Oh, how so?
Well, in my 20s, the way I treated my body was exactly like a tech startup rushing a minimum viable product to market. You don't care at all about the back-end architecture.
Oh, right. Just ship it.
Yeah. You don't care about the long-term stability of the code base or if the servers are going to catch fire in 5 years. You just want the front-end user interface to look incredibly flashy so you can attract investors or, in this case, a partner.
That's a great analogy.
You are shipping a buggy product that looks great on the surface, but you can only patch that bad code for so long before the whole system crashes. And that's the pivot the transcript explores.
Right.
As David and Alice mature, they describe an inevitable shift away from that high-impact aesthetic punishment, moving toward a much more intuitive, sustainable approach focused on longevity, functional capability, and mental clarity. They stopped worrying about the UI and started refactoring the back-end database.
The refactoring analogy holds up perfectly there, because they transition from viewing exercise as a tool for visual modification to viewing it as a critical mechanism for internal preservation.
The metrics of success change completely.
Exactly. It's no longer about single-digit body fat percentages. It's about functional strength.
Yeah.
Can I lift this heavy object off the ground with perfect mechanics? Can I sprint to catch a flight without tearing a hamstring? Can I extend the window of my active, pain-free life well into my 70s and 80s?
I completely agree with the utility of that shift, but let me throw a wrench in the gears for a second.
Go for it.
So the transcript frames this evolution as moving from punishment to celebration, which, it sounds beautiful, but is it really a celebration or is it just capitulation?
What do you mean by capitulation?
Well, as we age, our joints start hurting, our recovery slows down, and we physically just can't sustain the punishment phase anymore. So we rebrand it. We call it longevity training or functional movement, just to make ourselves feel better about the fact that we can't max out our back squat like we used to.
That's dark.
I know, but I have to ask, are we genuinely celebrating our bodies, or are we just making peace with our own decay?
Wow. Okay, that is a highly cynical but totally fair pushback. However, the transcript pushes back against that exact cynicism by placing the shift firmly in the context of our modern environment.
Okay, tell me more.
What's fascinating here is the speakers make a profound observation. We are entirely immersed in a profoundly sedentary culture. Our environment is engineered for stillness, like we talked about. Given that reality, they argue that choosing to engage in deliberate, challenging physical exertion isn't capitulation at all.
It's not giving up.
Far from it.
Yeah.
It is a radical act of self-care. It is a proactive, aggressive intervention against the baseline deterioration that modern society practically mandates.
A radical act of self-care. I really want to linger on that specific phrasing for a minute because self-care has been so heavily co-opted lately.
Oh, absolutely.
We usually associate it with bubble baths, face masks, and taking a mental health day on the couch. But framing deliberate physical stress as an act of self-care, that changes the entire temperature of the conversation.
It reframes the whole concept.
It really does. It implies that simply existing in our current society is a slow form of damage, and lifting a weight or going for a run is administering the antidote.
Well, Just look at the sheer mechanics of the modern workday. It is the perfect engine for physical decay.
It really is.
We are economically incentivized, often required, really, to fold our bodies into ergonomically catastrophic chairs, lock our hip flexors into a shortened position, round our thoracic spines, jut our cervical spines forward toward a glowing rectangle, and remain frozen in that position for 8 to 12 hours a day.
When you describe it like that, it sounds like torture.
It is physiological torture over the long term. Over time, that posture literally rewires your neuromuscular pathways. Your glutes forget how to fire. Your psoas muscle becomes chronically tight, pulling on your lower back. The default state of the modern human is not just stagnation. It is active structural degradation.
So if that's the baseline, right, if the water we are swimming in is actively pulling us down, then simply standing up and demanding that your heart rate elevate to 160 beats per minute, demanding that your muscle fibers contract against heavy resistance, that is inherently rebellious.
It is a rebellion.
It's a refusal to participate in the slow decay.
Precisely. If you remain trapped in the punishment mindset, if you only view exercise as a transactional penalty for eating a slice of pizza or a chore you have to suffer through to manipulate your body weight, you are playing a miserable, unwinnable game.
It's so depressing.
You are just fighting a desperate rearguard action against your sedentary reality. But when you undergo this shift David and Alice describe, the exertion transforms. You are celebrating the machinery. You are testing the tolerances of the engine. It becomes an internal requirement, totally uncoupled from societal expectations.
It's like you're taking the sports car out of the garage, putting it on the track, and opening up the throttle just to remind the engine what it was actually built to do.
Exactly.
But to push that machinery effectively, you have to understand the specific systems that govern it. And the transcript doesn't just leave this in the realm of vague philosophy. It breaks human movement down into distinct, highly functional pillars. So let's dig into the actual biology and the programming of this. Let's look at the plumbing and the electrical grid.
Yeah, let's get into it. So the logical starting point, and the first pillar discussed in the text, is the cardiovascular engine. This is the bedrock. We are talking about the efficiency of your heart, your lungs, and your vascular network.
The plumbing.
The plumbing, exactly. Now, assuming you, the listener, are already well-versed in the fitness space,
Right.
we don't need to waste time defining basic terms like high-intensity interval training or low-intensity steady-state cardio. We all know what HIIT and less are.
Right.
What the transcript does brilliantly is navigate the tension between these two modalities, a tension that has honestly dominated fitness media for the last decade.
Oh, absolutely. The fitness industry loves a binary conflict.
They love to make you choose.
They really do. For a long time, the narrative was that steady-state cardio was just dead. It was boring, it burned muscle, it was a waste of your time. Everything had to be HIIT. You had to redline your heart rate, push yourself into anaerobic debt, vomit in a bucket, and be done in 20 minutes to maximize post-exercise oxygen consumption.
The whole EPOC craze.
Exactly. It was a race to see who could accumulate the most central nervous system fatigue in the shortest amount of time. But recently, we've seen this massive pendulum swing back towards zone 2, steady-state cardio. And the speakers in our source material tackle this debate head-on.
They do, and they rightfully dismantle the idea that you have to choose a side. The biology demands both, but for entirely different reasons.
So break that down for us.
Well, when we look at HIIT, we are looking at stress adaptation at the extreme end of the spectrum. You're intentionally pushing the heart rate near its absolute maximum, forcing the body to operate without sufficient oxygen.
The anaerobic threshold.
Right. This forces mitochondrial adaptations and improves your VO2 max. It teaches your cardiovascular system how to recover rapidly from a massive shock. But the hidden cost of HIIT, which the industry largely ignored for years, is the immense toll it takes on the central nervous system.
And that CNS fatigue is the silent killer of consistency. I mean, if you are doing 4 heavy HIIT sessions a week, your nervous system is essentially marinating in cortisol and adrenaline.
You're in constant panic mode.
Yeah, you are telling your body it is constantly fighting for its life. You might be improving your VO2 max, sure, but you are also frying your electrical grid, which is why the resurgence of LIS, that low-grade conversational pace cardio, is so crucial, and why the source highlights it.
LAS is the foundational architecture. When you engage in steady-state cardio for 45 minutes to an hour, you are driving completely different physiological adaptations. You are physically expanding the left ventricle of the heart, allowing it to pump more blood per stroke.
Wait, literally expanding the heart.
Literally stretching the chamber so it holds more volume. You're also increasing capillarization, literally growing new microscopic blood vessels to deliver oxygen to your muscle tissues more efficiently.
That is incredible.
It is. But perhaps most importantly in the context of our hyper-stressed modern lives, steady-state cardio heavily stimulates the parasympathetic nervous system.
The rest and digest system, which is counteracting the fight or flight of all that high-intensity work.
Exactly. You are building an immense aerobic base without taxing the central nervous system. A well-constructed cardiovascular protocol demands the high-end stress response training of intervals to raise the ceiling and the foundational parasympathetic-friendly endurance of steady-state work to widen the floor.
Okay, but here's where the transcript gets really fascinating to me. They don't restrict the conversation about the cardiovascular engine to just the heart and the lungs.
No, they take it upstairs.
Right. They draw a direct chemical line from the heart rate to the brain. We have all heard of the runner's high, this mythological state where the suffering of a long run supposedly evaporates and you just feel euphoric.
The elusive high.
Exactly. The source text describes this as a powerful, natural antidepressant. But let's get under the hood of that, because we always hear about endorphins, right? Is that the whole story? Because I've read recently that the endorphin theory might actually be fundamentally flawed.
It's a brilliant point to raise. For decades, the dominant scientific narrative was that sustained cardiovascular exertion triggered a flood of endorphins, endogenous opioid peptides that masked pain and created euphoria.
That was gospel in the running community.
Total gospel. And it is true that endorphins are released into the bloodstream during heavy exercise. However, the actual molecules of endorphins are quite large. They have a very difficult time crossing the blood-brain barrier.
Oh, interesting.
So while they are circulating in your body and dampening physical pain in the muscles, they likely aren't the primary driver of that profound neurological shift, the actual high in the brain.
So if it isn't the endorphins making it into the brain, what is actually causing the shift? What is chemically washing the brain during a long run?
Current neurobiological research, which aligns perfectly with the holistic view presented in the transcript, points heavily toward the endocannabinoid system.
Wait, really? Like cannabis?
Yes, exactly. Unlike endorphins, endocannabinoids, specifically a lipid called anandamide, are small enough to easily cross the blood-brain barrier. Anandamide binds to the exact same neuroreceptors that THC from cannabis binds to.
That is mind-blowing.
So when you engage in sustained, rhythmic cardiovascular exercise, your body produces a surge of these endocannabinoids. They slip into the brain, reduce anxiety, promote a sense of calm, and literally dull the perception of physical discomfort.
So the runner's high is basically your body making its own natural THC.
Essentially, yes.
It is an evolutionary masterpiece. I mean, from an anthropological perspective, humans are persistence hunters.
Right.
We don't have claws, we don't have venom, and we aren't particularly fast sprinters. Our evolutionary superpower was our ability to jog after prey for hours and hours in the heat until the animal just collapsed from heat exhaustion.
A brutal but effective strategy.
Yeah. But to do that, the human brain had to evolve a chemical reward system that made prolonged, agonizing running feel incredible. We basically had to drug ourselves to survive.
And that is the ultimate holistic connection. By deliberately engaging the cardiovascular engine, you are hacking an ancient survival mechanism. You are producing endogenous chemicals that actively combat the modern epidemics of stress, anxiety, and depressive symptoms.
It's built-in medicine.
It is. You are proving that the mind and the body are not separate entities. The mind is a physical expression of the body's chemistry.
It's just incredible. But a highly efficient heart and a chemically balanced brain are really only as useful as the structural frame that carries them through the world. Which brings us to the second pillar discussed in the transcript. Resistance training.
Structural reinforcement.
Exactly. Now, they are very careful to distinguish what they mean here. They explicitly state that modern resistance training must be viewed through a lens far wider than just muscle hypertrophy. We know hypertrophy is the cellular growth of the muscle fiber. That's the bodybuilding aspect. But the text insists the true value is much deeper.
They zero in on the foundational principle of all strength training, which is progressive overload.
Define that for us really quickly.
It's the systematic incremental increase of physical demand placed upon the musculoskeletal system over time. If you squat 200 pounds for 5 repetitions today, next week you must squat 205 pounds, or 200 pounds for 6 repetitions. You must force a novel adaptation.
Right. You can't just do the same thing forever.
Exactly. But the transcript frames this incredibly mechanical process as a profound metaphor for life.
See, this is where I start getting an allergic reaction to fitness rhetoric. Lifting weights is a metaphor for life. It sounds like something printed on a cheap t-shirt being sold on Instagram.
I know exactly the kind of post you mean.
Right. Let's actually put this to the test. Let's look at the cross-adaptation hypothesis. How does putting a barbell on my back and squatting it until my legs shake actually translate to handling a psychological crisis?
That's the real question.
If my boss yells at me, or heaven forbid, I get audited by the IRS, my ability to deadlift 400 pounds doesn't practically help me solve those problems. Where is the actual tangible link between muscular resistance and psychological resilience?
Okay, here's the secret. It is not a metaphor. It is a literal physiological conditioning of the nervous system.
Wait, really? Not a metaphor?
Not at all. Think about your software engineering analogy from earlier. If you want to know if a server network is robust, you don't just leave it alone and hope for the best. You run a stress test.
Right.
You use a program like Chaos Monkey to intentionally inject massive amounts of traffic, randomized failures, and acute stress into the system just to see how it handles the load.
Okay, I follow.
When you step under a heavy barbell, you're running Chaos Monkey on your own central nervous system.
Oh, wow. You were intentionally simulating a crisis.
Exactly. When you execute a heavy lift, you are placing an enormous acute load on the CNS. The brain perceives a massive physical threat. It has to recruit thousands of motor units instantly. It has to stabilize the spine, manage intra-abdominal pressure, and most importantly, it has to process a tidal wave of sensory information screaming that this is uncomfortable and dangerous.
It's a panic state.
Total panic. The chemical cascade of stress hormones, cortisol, adrenaline, noradrenaline, is triggered immediately. But through progressive overload, you are teaching the nervous system to remain calm, focused, and capable under that massive hormonal dump.
Oh, I see. To the central nervous system, a threat is a threat. It doesn't necessarily distinguish between the physical threat of a barbell crushing you and the psychological threat of a massive financial crisis. The chemical panic alarm is exactly the same.
The trigger is different, but the internal chemical reality is remarkably similar. If you spend years systematically training your nervous system to regulate its panic response, to execute complex motor patterns perfectly while under acute physical duress, you are fundamentally altering your baseline of resilience.
You're raising your threshold for panic.
Exactly. When the psychological crisis hits, your nervous system has a massive reserve of operational capacity. You have practiced remaining composed in the fire.
That completely recontextualizes the gym. It isn't a place to build a bigger bicep. It's a laboratory where you systematically inoculate yourself against the chaos of the world.
Inoculation is the perfect word.
And the receipt you get for that inoculation is something we are all intimately familiar with. DOMS. Delayed onset muscle soreness. The transcript leans into this specific sensation quite heavily.
It does. For anyone listening who has engaged in serious resistance training, particularly focusing on the eccentric phase, the slow lowering of the weight under tension DOMS is that profound, deep tissue ache that sets in 24 to 48 hours after the session.
Oh, yeah. It's the stiffness that makes walking down the stairs a highly strategic, painful endeavor.
The backward walk down the stairs.
Exactly. Now, let's debate this, because the old school bodybuilding mentality was that if you didn't have debilitating DOMS the next day, you didn't work hard enough. No pain, no gain. Is DOMS actually a reliable indicator of muscle hypertrophy? Does more soreness equal more growth?
The current sports science consensus is a resounding no.
Really? Not at all.
Not at all. DOMS is not a prerequisite for hypertrophy, nor is its severity correlated with the amount of muscle growth you will achieve.
So what is it then? Just pain?
What DOMS actually represents is structural damage, specifically micro tears in the muscle fibers and the connective tissue, and the subsequent inflammatory response as the body sends cytokines and nutrients to repair the area. It is primarily an indicator of novel stimulus.
Meaning doing something you aren't used to.
Right. Your body experienced a range of motion, a load, or a volume it was completely unaccustomed to. As you become more advanced and your body adapts to those specific movements, the severity of DOMS decreases drastically, even though you are still lifting heavier weights and building muscle.
Okay, so we shouldn't be chasing DOMS as the ultimate goal. However, the transcript brings up a really vital psychological shift regarding this soreness. Even if it isn't the sole indicator of growth, the way we interpret that physical sensation is deeply revealing.
It is the ultimate test of reframing.
Right. Because normally, human biology dictates that pain means injury. Pain is an alarm telling you to stop what you are doing immediately. But to adhere to a resistance training protocol, you have to consciously override millions of years of evolutionary programming.
You really do.
You have to intellectually recategorize the physical sensation of DOMS. You have to decide that this specific ache is not damage. It is the physical sensation of adaptation. It is weakness leaving the body, to use another cliche.
But it's true. It is a profound act of cognitive reframing. You are taking a negative sensory input and willfully interpreting it as a positive physiological outcome. When a person finally makes that shift, when they wake up sore and feel a sense of satisfaction rather than concern, they have fundamentally changed their relationship with discomfort.
They don't panic when it hurts.
Exactly. They have learned to separate productive stress from destructive injury.
But of course, there is a breaking point. I mean, if you spend all your time injecting high-intensity stress into your cardiovascular system and systematically tearing down your muscle fibers under heavy loads, you are building a very rigid, highly stressed machine.
Too much tension.
Way too much. Too much tension, continuously applied without a release valve, will eventually cause the strongest steel to snap. A muscle that can deadlift 500 pounds is functionally useless if the tension is so high that the person can't bend over to tie their own shoes without their lower back spasming.
We've all seen that guy at the gym.
Oh, absolutely. And that introduces the critical third pillar from our source material.
The third pillar? Flexibility, mobility, and what David and Alice beautifully articulate as mindful movement. We're looking at disciplines like yoga, dedicated mobility work, Pilates, and targeted end-range stretching.
The stuff everyone skips.
The stuff everyone skips. The transcript notes and the data overwhelmingly supports this,
Right.
that this is historically the most neglected aspect of physical fitness, particularly among men. Yet it is arguably the most vital for long-term, pain-free functionality.
The hosts in the transcript refer to this pillar as the yin to the yang of intense training. And I think that duality is so essential. The cardiovascular work, the progressive overload, that is pure yang. It is heat, it is aggression, it is contraction, it is the deliberate application of stress.
It's very driving.
Very driving. But a biological system cannot operate purely in the yang. You cannot redline an engine perpetually. You desperately need the yin. The cooling, the lengthening of the tissues, the downregulation of the nervous system, the focus on deep diaphragmatic breathing.
It is the essential maintenance. If resistance training is building the structural integrity of the chassis, mobility work is ensuring the suspension actually functions.
Analogy.
But beyond just lengthening tight hamstrings, the transcript introduces a vital concept here that elevates this pillar from simple stretching to deep neurological programming. They introduce the concept of proprioception.
Yes, the sixth sense, the body's unconscious ability to perceive its own position, movement, and orientation in three-dimensional space.
Exactly. We have a complex network of mechanoreceptors located in our muscles, tendons, and joints. Things like muscle spindles and Golgi tendon organs. These sensors are constantly firing millions of signals a second back to the brain, mapping exactly where every limb is, how much tension it is under, and how fast it is moving.
It's basically an internal GPS.
An internal, incredibly fast GPS. This continuous biofeedback loop is what allows a gymnast to perform a backflip and land perfectly on a 4-inch beam. It's what allows you to touch your nose with your eyes closed.
Okay, let's tie this back to the sedentary problem we discussed earlier. If our modern environment forces us to sit in the exact same chair, staring at the exact same screen, barely moving our joints through a fraction of their capable range of motion for 10 hours a day, what happens to that proprioceptive map in the brain?
It degrades, and it degrades rapidly.
Oh,
yeah. The brain is ruthlessly efficient. In neuroscience, there's a concept called the sensory homunculus. It's a physical map in the cerebral cortex where different areas of the body are represented. The areas that move the most, with the most complexity, have the largest representation.
Like the hands and face, right?
Exactly. But if you stop moving your spine through its full range of flexion and extension, if you stop rotating your hips, the brain assumes you no longer need that high-definition map for those areas. So the resolution drops. The map becomes blurry.
Wow. You literally lose the conscious connection to parts of your own physical geometry. You become clumsy if you trip on a rug.
And this is where catastrophic injuries happen as we age. It's rarely a massive trauma. It's a failure of proprioception.
Like twisting an ankle.
Precisely. You step off a curb, the foot lands slightly inverted. The mechanoreceptors fail to send the signal to the brain fast enough to correct the ankle position. The full weight of the body comes down, and the ligaments tear.
Just because the signal was too slow?
Because the map was blurry. The transcript argues that engaging in mindful movement practices, like complex yoga flows or balance work, is the ultimate safeguard. It forces the brain to constantly recalibrate its proprioceptive map. It is active, high-definition neurological maintenance.
So if we look at the grand architecture of this transcript, we have an incredibly robust framework here. We have cardiovascular training to maximize the efficiency of the internal engine and optimize neurochemistry. We have resistance training to force structural adaptation and build central nervous system resilience against stress. And we have mindful movement to preserve the proprioceptive map and ensure the chassis can actually move smoothly.
It is a brilliant, logically flawless blueprint.
It really is, but it is entirely theoretical until it meets human nature.
Right, the human element.
Because knowing the optimal protocols for a human body is useless if you don't actually do the work. Which brings us to the most difficult part of the transcript, the psychological hurdle, the million-dollar question.
Adherence. Psychology of consistency. Every January, millions of people understand the 3 pillars we just discussed. They buy the gym memberships, they download the optimized programs, they buy the heart rate monitors, and by March, 70% of them have quit.
The attrition rate in fitness is just staggering.
It really is. What is the fundamental psychological difference between the person who quits in 6 weeks and the person who effortlessly sustains a demanding physical practice for 3 decades?
Well, the source material is unequivocal about the answer. It is not about finding a more entertaining workout. And it is not about raw willpower. Willpower is a finite resource. It depletes.
You can't white-knuckle it forever.
You really can't. The answer lies in a fundamental identity-level shift in motivation. The shift from extrinsic to intrinsic motivation. We really need to dissect this because understanding this mechanism is the only way to actually build adherence.
Let's break down the failure state first, which is extrinsic motivation. This is behavior driven by the desire to attain an external reward or avoid an external punishment.
Give me an example.
In the context of fitness, it's working out solely to hit a target weight on a scale, or to fit into a specific dress for an upcoming wedding, or to look a certain way just to receive validation and praise from others. The transcript rightly identifies this as incredibly fickle and ultimately unsustainable.
Because it places the locus of control entirely outside of yourself. Let's look at the psychology of the reward prediction error here. If your entire motivation is driven by an extrinsic goal, say looking good at the beach this summer, you are engaging in a delayed return environment.
Right.
You suffer through a brutal workout today, but the reward, looking good at the beach, is 3 months away. The human brain, evolutionarily, is terrible at dealing with delayed returns. We want immediate dopamine.
We are wired for the short term.
Exactly. And if you do reach the goal, if you do look great at the beach, what happens the next day?
The hedonic treadmill kicks in. The novelty of the external reward vanishes almost instantly. The goal has been achieved. Therefore, the motivation to endure the physical stress ceases to exist. The behavior collapses. You stop working out until a new external pressure arises, creating that classic yo-yo effect.
We've all been there.
To achieve true adherence, the reward cannot be delayed and it cannot be external. It must be immediate and internal. That is intrinsic motivation.
It's like reading a book for a school grade, which is extrinsic, versus reading a book because you simply can't put it down. Intrinsic motivation is engaging in the behavior because the behavior itself is the reward.
Right.
Think about a surfer paddling out into freezing water at 5 a.m. They aren't doing it to burn calories or to get a six-pack. They are doing it because the visceral experience of catching the wave is intensely, inherently joyful. The activity is its own justification. So how do we apply that to the gym?
The transcript points out that you have to find the specific modality of movement that brings you intrinsic joy. Or at the very least, you must learn to derive deep satisfaction from the feeling of capability.
I like that, the feeling of capability.
Yeah. You exercise because you enjoy the sensation of your muscles working smoothly. You exercise because you have empirically noticed that your baseline anxiety drops significantly on the days you train. The reward happens the exact moment you perform the action, When the movement is the reward, you don't need to expend willpower to force yourself to do it. The adherence becomes almost effortless.
And when you reach that state of effortless adherence, the transcript introduces the ultimate psychological goal. Exercise transforms from an item on a to-do list into a non-negotiable pillar of your identity. It ceases to be something you do and becomes an expression of who you are.
The linguistic shift there is profound. It moves from an obligation to a privilege. It changes the internal monologue from, I have to drag myself to the gym today, to, I get to go test my capabilities today.
Have to versus get to.
Exactly. The host of the podcast notes that this still requires discipline. I mean, there will be days you are tired or unmotivated, but it is a discipline rooted in profound self-respect. You are disciplining yourself to maintain the only vehicle you will ever have to experience consciousness. You are no longer punishing the body for failing to look a certain way. You are honoring the body's design.
It is a radical reimagining of the self. And what I appreciate so much about this specific source material being rooted in advanced language acquisition is that it doesn't just give us the philosophy. It provides the specific vocabulary to anchor these concepts.
Right, the words matter.
They really do. Language is the operating system of thought. If you only have the vocabulary of a meathead like, I'm going to go crush some weights and get a pump, your internal experience of fitness will be shallow. But if you possess the precise linguistic tools to articulate your physical reality, your practice becomes intelligent, nuanced, and holistic. We've actually woven the core vocabulary of this transcript throughout our entire conversation today without explicitly defining them like a dictionary.
Yeah, we have. And it's so important. When you understand your baseline state is sedentary, you recognize the environmental hazard you must actively combat.
Right.
When you approach your protocols with a holistic mindset, you stop isolating the gym from your sleep, your nutrition, and your stress levels. You recognize that adherence, the quiet, unsexy consistency over decades, will always outperform short-term manic intensity.
Consistency over intensity, always.
Always. You cultivate intrinsic motivation so the process becomes its own reward. You develop your proprioception to seamlessly navigate the physical world and avoid injury. And you recontextualize the ache of DOMS not as an injury, but as the tangible proof of your own physical adaptation.
You're literally building a new lexicon for a new identity. So how do we bring this all together? We've covered the evolution from punishment celebration, the deep biology of the cardiovascular and structural pillars, the absolute necessity of mindful maintenance, and the psychology of making it last forever. What is the ultimate grand thesis that David and Alice arrive at in the Pod Zone transcript?
The thesis is that you must ruthlessly eliminate the concept of a finish line.
No finish line.
There is no destination. Fitness is not a static state you achieve and then put on a shelf to admire. It is a continuous, evolving, lifelong practice. Much like a musician practices scales or a philosopher practices inquiry, you are practicing human movement.
It is a continuous process of gathering data. That is such a freeing perspective to me.
Why is that?
Because it means there is no such thing as a bad workout anymore. If you go to the gym and you feel terrible and you can only lift half of what you normally lift, you didn't fail. You just collected a highly valuable data point.
Oh, I love that.
You gather the data. Why did I underperform? Did I sleep poorly? Am I under psychological stress? Is my nervous system fatigued? You take that data, you adjust the variables, and you run the experiment again the next day.
You become a scientist, studying the most complex organism on Earth, yourself.
You build a personalized, constantly evolving protocol that adapts to the specific demands of whatever season of life you are currently navigating.
Because life changes. It does. The way you train at 30 will not and should not be the way you train at 60. The practice morphs, but the adherence remains absolute.
That is just beautifully said. And that brings us to the close of our deep dive today. But, we never like to just leave you with a summary. We want to challenge you to apply this framework immediately. Think about the intersection of those two bookshelves we talked about at the beginning. The brutal mechanics of anatomy and the deep philosophy of why we endure. Where are you currently standing in that room?
That's a great question to ask yourself.
Look at your own relationship with physical movement right now. Are you still trapped in the buggy software version of your youth, driven by extrinsic validation and the punishment of a sedentary lifestyle? Or are you actively refactoring your architecture for the long haul? Here's the thought I want you to carry into your week. What if you completely change the parameters of your very next physical exertion?
Just reframe it completely.
Exactly. Whether you are stepping under a heavy barbell tomorrow morning, unrolling a yoga mat, or just taking a brisk walk, I want you to view it not as a chore and not as a punishment. View it as a deliberate scientific experiment to gather data on your own machinery.
Run the test.
Test your proprioception. Observe your nervous system's response to stress. Search for that intrinsic joy in the sheer capability of your lungs. If you stop treating your body like a courtroom where you are constantly on trial for your physical imperfections and start treating it like a laboratory of human potential, how radically might your entire existence evolve by this time next year?
A phenomenal paradigm shift to leave them with. It has been an absolute pleasure dissecting the architecture of movement with you today.
The pleasure was all mine. Thank you all for joining us on this incredibly deep dive into the philosophy, the biology, and the lexicon of modern physical capability. Keep running the experiment, keep gathering the data, and most importantly, keep moving. We'll see you on the next deep dive.
I mean, just think about it. Millions of people literally woke up at 5 in the morning today, sacrificed 2 hours of crucial sleep, dragged themselves to a gym, and just punished their bodies on a treadmill.
Oh, absolutely. And they're entirely unaware that, biologically speaking, they were actively making themselves weaker.
Right. It's wild. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone, because today we are tearing down this culturally glorified hustle of the modern fitness industry.
Yeah, it's a multi-billion-dollar machine, really. And it thrives on fleeting trends, highly marketed tech, and just a staggering amount of physiological misinformation.
Exactly. It's all designed to keep you confused and constantly buying the next 30-day shred. So our mission today is to cut through all that noise. We're going to explore the actual science and philosophy of holistic physical fitness.
Which is so deeply needed right now.
It really is. We are pulling from sources that break down literally everything, from the deep neurobiology of how your body actually recovers at a cellular level to the psychological frameworks that dictate whether you quit in a week or build a practice for a decade.
It's a necessary dismantling, honestly, because the way we talk about the body culturally, it's just so divorced from how the body actually functions.
Yeah.
We treat it like clay, right? Like something to be aesthetically sculpted for a specific event rather than a highly complex, adaptive biological system.
Right, like trying to look good for a wedding.
Exactly. So for anyone listening who wants to move past this transactional input-output model of I sweat to look good in a swimsuit, this deep dive is for you. We're going to dive into the actual mechanisms under your skin.
Okay, let's unpack this, because we need to establish a major mindset shift right away.
Definitely.
We are not talking about how to get a six-pack today. If aesthetic manipulation is your primary goal, the internet is flooded with guides for that.
Flooded is an understatement.
Right. What we're talking about today is moving away from those fleeting metrics. It's about building something sustainable, something that actively upgrades your cognitive function and promotes long-term physiological resilience.
And this gives the listener the advanced, nuanced vocabulary to truly articulate a fitness journey. It's moving from I go to the gym to actually understanding your own biology.
Because when you look at the baseline of the modern human condition, our baseline is just a profound evolutionary mismatch.
It really is.
Our bodies evolved over millennia for near constant motion, varied multiplanar physical tasks just to survive. But now we live in a predominantly sedentary culture.
Right.
And by sedentary, I mean an environment characterized by so much sitting and practically zero required physical activity. You commute in a seat, you stare at a screen in a seat.
You unwind in a seat on the couch.
Yeah,
the environmental mismatch is the core problem here.
So any deliberate exertion isn't just exercise, it's a radical act of self-care.
That's the perfect way to frame it, because our biology is still expecting us to be persistence hunters or, agrarian foragers.
But our reality demands no physical strain at all.
None. So when you view the human organism through that lens, choosing to exert yourself, like choosing to lift a heavy weight or elevate your heart rate when your survival doesn't strictly depend on it, it stops being a chore.
It's a rebellion.
It's a conscious rebellion. You are deliberately introducing a controlled stressor to basically remind your DNA how to function. It really frames exercise as the ultimate antidote to the modern condition.
It is a rebellion. But man, it's interesting how misguided that rebellion usually is when people first start out.
Oh, completely.
Like, think about the typical fitness journey, especially in your early 20s. It's almost entirely driven by extrinsic panic. You have vacation coming up, and suddenly you're crash dieting, running 5 miles a day.
Punishing your body for what you ate the weekend before.
Exactly. It feels less like self-improvement and way more like self-flagellation.
Well, that youthful, high-impact approach is so incredibly common because it relies on the most accessible fuel source, which is shame or ego.
Right.
And those are really powerful short-term motivators. But biologically and psychologically, it is completely unsustainable. You're basically weaponizing exercise against yourself.
Which is brutal.
Right. If we connect this to the bigger picture, the evolution our sources map out is this necessary transition away from that punitive model toward a truly holistic approach.
And we should clarify, we don't mean holistic in the crystal healing wellness buzzword sense.
No, we mean it in the literal physiological sense, meaning you have to consider the whole person, integrating the central nervous system, the musculoskeletal system, your emotional state, not just measuring the circumference of a bicep.
It's a massive shift. You go from punishing the body for what it isn't to optimizing what the body can actually do. But how do you actually make that psychological leap? Because if our early fitness goals are basically like cramming for a final exam, staying up all night, drinking awful coffee just to get a grade, how do we transition to becoming lifelong learners of our own bodies?
That's a great question. Because cramming works in a panic, but it doesn't make you a scholar.
Right. You forget everything the next day.
You make the leap by shifting your attention from those external metrics to internal feedback loops. When you cram, your focus is entirely external, like the grade or the mirror. To become that lifelong student, you have to develop a deep, almost clinical curiosity about your own biological mechanisms. Instead of asking, how many calories did this burn? You start asking things like, how did this specific movement affect my joint mobility?
Oh, I see. Or like, what happened to my focus 2 hours after that intense run?
Exactly. You become an active observer of your own physiological data.
And to actually understand that data, we have to look at the physiological tools at our disposal, which brings us to the 3 main pillars of physical fitness. Let's start with pillar 1, the engine. Cardiovascular exercise.
The engine is the perfect starting point because it dictates the baseline capacity for literally everything else you do.
So we're talking running, swimming, cycling.
Yeah, sustained, rhythmic engagement of large muscle groups. The physiological adaptation we're chasing here is the efficiency of your heart, your lungs, and your vascular network.
Upgrading the plumbing, basically.
Exactly. You are literally upgrading the biological pump in the plumbing that delivers oxygen and nutrients to every single cell, while at the same time clearing out metabolic waste.
But the moment you decide to train that engine, you run face first into the most toxic debate in the fitness world.
Oh, here we go.
Right. High-intensity interval training versus low-intensity steady-state cardio, HIIT versus LSS.
It's such a tribal debate.
It really is. You have one camp screaming that anything other than an all-out sprint is a total waste of time, and another camp claiming HII will flood your body with cortisol and just destroy your joints.
Yeah, both extremes are missing the nuance.
So let's look under the hood. What is actually happening chemically when you do a HIIT session?
Let's break down the cellular reality. High-intensity interval training involves short bursts of maximum all-out effort, followed by brief recovery periods.
Right, so it's super time efficient.
It is, but because the demand for energy is so immediate and so extreme, your body cannot deliver oxygen fast enough to fuel the work. So you cross what we call the anaerobic threshold.
Okay, anaerobic meaning without oxygen.
Right. Your cells are forced to rapidly cleave stored glycogen for fuel without oxygen, which produces a massive amount of metabolic byproducts, specifically hydrogen ions and lactate.
Okay, wait, so that's that intense burning sensation in your legs when you're sprinting up a steep hill?
Yes. Your cells are essentially drowning in their own exhaust.
Wow.
And the biological adaptation to that specific stress is incredible. Over time, your body becomes vastly more efficient at buffering that acid and clearing those waste products.
So you're basically pushing your anaerobic threshold higher.
Exactly. You are teaching your body how to survive and recover from a severe, acute metabolic crisis.
Okay, so HIIT is survival training for cellular emergencies. What about LSS, like a 45-minute light jog or a brisk walk. A lot of people dismiss it because it doesn't leave you gasping for air in a pool of sweat.
Dismissing LISS is just a fundamental misunderstanding of human physiology. It's strictly meant for building a deep aerobic base.
Right.
During low-intensity, steady-state work, your heart rate is elevated, but you are still operating fully within the aerobic zone. You're using oxygen to burn fatty acids for fuel.
So it's a completely different energy pathway.
Entirely. The primary mechanism of adaptation here is the development of capillary density and mitochondrial efficiency.
Wait, capillary density, like you're growing new blood vessels.
You are physically growing new microscopic blood vessels to bathe your muscle tissues in oxygen, and you're multiplying the number of mitochondria, the power plants, inside your cells.
That's amazing.
And furthermore, LISS is significantly less taxing on the central nervous system. You're building this massive, robust aerobic base without frying your brain's ability to recover. So really, a combination of both is the optimal approach for anyone listening.
Right, so the tribal warfare between the two camps is totally missing the point. One expands the size of the gas tank and the fuel lines, and the other upgrades the horsepower. You absolutely need both.
Precisely. You need that top-end metabolic conditioning of HIT, but you require the structural adaptations of a LISS to actually recover from those bursts.
Okay, but here's where it gets really interesting. Let's move beyond the muscles and the lungs for a second, because the cardio conversation usually ignores the most critical organ involved.
The brain.
The brain. The neurological payoff of cardiovascular exertion is staggering. I'm talking about the famous runner's high.
Oh, the runner's high is a fascinating piece of evolutionary biology. For decades, we attributed it solely to endorphins, right?
Right, which are like natural painkillers.
Endogenous opioids your body produces to blunt pain. But recent research, which our sources heavily highlight, points to endocannabinoids as the true drivers.
Endocannabinoids.
Yeah. These are lipid-based neurotransmitters that bind to the exact same receptors in your brain as THC.
Wait, really? So your brain is essentially manufacturing its own internal mood elevators just to keep you running?
Yes. During sustained cardiovascular effort, your brain floods your system with anandamide, which is often called the bliss molecule.
A bliss molecule. That's incredible.
From an evolutionary anthropology perspective, this is the mechanism of persistence hunting. Early humans didn't outsprint their prey. They tracked them for miles until the animal collapsed from heat exhaustion.
Oh, so the brain developed this reward system to incentivize us to keep moving through the fatigue.
Exactly. And today, we experience that as a profound natural antidepressant effect. It clears cognitive fog, dramatically lowers baseline anxiety, and regulates mood.
Okay, but let me push back slightly, because we're making this sound incredibly romantic.
Fair enough.
The evolutionary biology is super neat, but the actual reality of doing a 30-minute run when you're completely out of shape is just miserable. Cardio often feels like you're revving a car engine in the red zone.
It does.
Your chest burns. Your legs are heavy. Every instinct is screaming at you to stop.
Yeah.
How do we convince the listener that the mental runner's high is actually worth that initial physical discomfort?
You convince them by explaining the relationship between acute stress and chronic resilience. The discomfort of cardio is an acute, deeply controlled, and temporary stressor.
Okay.
When you force your heart rate up, you are intentionally mimicking a physiological panic state. Your nervous system registers the threat. But here's the magic. You are controlling it.
You're in charge of the panic.
Yes. You are teaching your brain that a spike in heart rate and a flood of adrenaline does not mean you are going to die. By repeatedly exposing yourself to this controlled physical stress, you calibrate your central nervous system. You widen your window of tolerance.
Oh, wow. So when a massive psychological stressor hits you later that week, like a crisis at work,
your nervous system doesn't immediately default to a panic attack because it's already deeply conditioned to process and clear stress hormones. That 30 minutes in the physical red zone is the exact price of admission for maintaining a smooth mental cruising altitude the rest of the week.
that is a brilliant way to frame it. You are literally inoculating yourself against psychological stress using physical stress.
Exactly.
Okay, so you've built this incredible, efficient engine. But what happens if you take a high-performance engine and put it into a chassis that's rusting and falling apart?
The moment you apply torque, the frame snaps.
Right. Which brings us to the second pillar of our structural integrity, the metaphor, resistance and strength training.
This is the domain of mechanical tension. Lifting weights, calisthenics, manipulating gravity to force a structural adaptation.
So the primary target here is the musculoskeletal system, right?
Yes, specifically driving muscle hypertrophy and reinforcing bone density.
Let's dig into the cellular biology of hypertrophy, because I think people assume muscles just sort of magically inflate when you lift. What is actually happening when you pick up a heavy dumbbell?
When you subject a muscle to a load it isn't accustomed to, you generate mechanical tension and metabolic stress. This literally causes microtrauma, microscopic tears in the muscle fibers themselves.
Literally tearing the muscle.
Yes. The body registers this localized damage and initiates an inflammatory response. It dispatches macrophages to clear out the cellular debris.
Okay, so a cleanup crew comes in.
Exactly. And then it signals satellite cells, which are a type of stem cell situated on the outside of the muscle fiber, to rush to the site of the damage.
Satellite cells. Got it.
These satellite cells fuse with the existing muscle fibers, donating their nuclei, which allows the muscle to synthesize new protein strands.
So the muscle repairs itself thicker and more resilient than it was before.
Precisely. Specifically so that the exact same stressor will not cause damage the next time.
But there's a massive catch there. So that the same stressor will not cause damage the next time. That brings us to the core law of this entire pillar. Progressive overload.
The golden rule of strength.
Right. If your body adapts to the 10-pound dumbbell, that 10-pound dumbbell is no longer a stressor.
Exactly. The human body's a masterpiece of efficiency. It will only adapt as much as it absolutely has to. If you lift the same weight for the same reps every week, your body reaches equilibrium and the growth just halts entirely.
So progressive overload dictates that you have to systematically and gradually increase the demand on the muscles.
You must. You have to increase the weight, add more reps, or decrease your rest intervals. You're constantly forcing the musculoskeletal system to solve a slightly more difficult physical puzzle.
And that biological demand is why strength training is such a profound metaphor for life.
It really is.
You are systematically teaching your brain how to handle heavier and heavier burdens. You step up to a barbell that feels impossibly heavy today. You struggle. Your central nervous system recruits more motor units. You adapt. And 2 months from now, that exact same weight is just your warm-up.
It's biological proof of your own capacity to endure.
Yes, you're literally manufacturing physical fortitude, and that translates directly into mental resilience. When you know you can grind through a brutal set of heavy squats, the intimidation factor of a difficult conversation at work shrinks dramatically.
The translation from physical grit to cognitive grit is profound. You are hardwiring the belief that discomfort is a vehicle for expansion rather than a signal to retreat.
But the discomfort of expanding that capacity is very real. We have to introduce the dreaded acronym here. DOMS.
Delayed onset muscle soreness.
Yes. For the listener, DOMS is that brutal, deep ache that hits you not during the workout, but a day or two after intense exercise. You wake up 2 days after a leg session, and you literally have to hold onto the wall to sit down on the toilet.
We've all been there.
What is the mechanism there? And why isn't it lactic acid? Because people still blame lactic acid.
Oh, the lactic acid myth refuses to die. As we discussed with cardio, lactate is a metabolic byproduct of anaerobic energy production, and your body clears it entirely within about an hour after exercise.
So it's not sitting in your legs for 2 days?
Lactate does not sit in your muscles for 2 days. DOMS is the physical sensation of that inflammatory cascade we just talked about.
The micro tears repairing themselves.
Exactly. It's the swelling, the rush of fluids, and the sensitization of pain receptors caused by the micro tears in the muscle fibers and the connective tissue to make them stronger. Your body is running a localized fever in that muscle to facilitate the cellular repair.
And this requires a massive mental shift, because we are deeply conditioned from childhood that pain equals injury. You touch a hot stove, it hurts, you pull away.
Right, pain means stop.
So when a beginner experiences severe DOMS, their immediate assumption is, I hurt myself, I did something wrong, I need to quit. How do we reframe that specific neurological signal?
You have to learn to distinguish between the sharp, acute pain of a mechanical injury, like a torn ligament, and the dull, spreading ache of biological adaptation.
Okay.
You must reframe DOMS not as an injury or a negative pain, but as the physical receipt of the transaction you made in the gym. It's tangible evidence of progress.
It's the feeling of your baseline expanding. I always compare DOMS to the mental fatigue you feel after learning a really difficult new concept.
Oh, I like that.
Like, say you're trying to learn a new language. After a few hours, your brain physically feels exhausted. You feel foggier than when you started. It hurts in the moment, but it's the feeling of your capacity expanding.
That is a phenomenal analogy. The cognitive fatigue is the exact same mechanism. It's the necessary friction of neuroplasticity. You're carving new neural pathways.
Physical DOMS is just neuroplasticity for your hamstrings.
The friction is the point. Without the friction, there's no carving.
But wait, if we are constantly building this massive cardiovascular engine and we're constantly tearing down and rebuilding these dense muscle fibers, we are creating a tremendous amount of structural tension.
A lot of tension, yeah.
And if you just build tension indefinitely, eventually something snaps. Which leads us directly to the third pillar, the most neglected pillar of all. Pillar 3, the counterbalance.
Flexibility and mindful movement.
Right. We're talking yoga, Pilates, dynamic mobility work, dedicated stretching protocols.
And it is entirely neglected because it doesn't stroke the ego, it doesn't give you a massive endorphin rush, and you can't really brag about your stretching numbers on social media.
But without it, you're saying the first 2 pillars will eventually destroy your joints. Why? If I'm running and lifting, I'm moving my body. Why do I need a separate pillar just for mobility?
What's fascinating here is the concept of proprioception.
Proprioception?
Yes, it's the body's awareness of itself in space, its movement, and its orientation. It relies on mechanoreceptors to tell your brain exactly where your limbs are and what the joint angle is.
Okay, so it's spatial awareness.
Right. And when you exclusively run or lift weights, you are almost always moving in a highly repetitive, linear sagittal plane, moving straight forward and back.
Like a bicep curl or a running stride.
Exactly. You are constantly contracting and shortening the muscles. Over time, your nervous system actually down-regulates its proprioceptive awareness of the ranges of motion you are no longer using.
Whoa.
The joint capsule tightens, the fascia becomes rigid, and you lose access to your own biomechanical hardware. For long-term, pain-free living, mindful movement is just as important as cardio or strength.
You build this incredible strength, but you trap it inside a straitjacket of your own tight fascia.
Precisely. This pillar acts as essential maintenance. Mindful movement forces the joints through their absolute end ranges of motion.
Which is the direct counterbalance to the repetitive motions and static postures of our daily lives.
Exactly. It restores the structural alignment so the strength you built can actually be expressed without causing a tear.
I always visualize this trio of pillars like engineering a skyscraper. The strength training, the progressive overload, that is building the steel framework.
Yes.
They're making the building incredibly dense and capable of supporting immense weight. But if that steel frame is completely rigid, the first time a massive gust of wind comes along, the building is going to snap in half.
It has no give.
Right. The mindful movement, the mobility, that is the yin to the yang of intense workouts. It's ensuring the building can sway in the wind without snapping.
Yielding without breaking is the definition of true physical resilience. Mobility is your insurance policy on the strength you've built.
Okay, so we have the blueprint. We know we need the engine, we need the steel frame, and we need the ability to sway in the wind.
The holistic framework is sound.
But there's a glaring problem here. Knowing what to do doesn't mean people actually do it. Every single person listening knows exercise is good for them. But this demands a pivot from the physical body to the psychological mind. Let's get into section 5, the psychology of adherence and motivation.
The million-dollar question. Why do most people falter?
Right, because you can have the perfect routine, but if you don't stick to it, it doesn't matter.
Well, it all starts with understanding adherence. Adherence just means sticking firmly to a plan or belief over a prolonged period. And the entire puzzle of adherence hinges on the vast difference between extrinsic motivation and intrinsic motivation.
Let's dissect extrinsic motivation because, as we established earlier, this is the fuel source for most beginners.
It is. Extrinsic motivation means your drive is tethered to an external reward. Exercising to fit into an outfit, seeking praise, trying to impress someone.
What does the psychological data say about relying on that?
The data is ruthless. It labels extrinsic motivation as fickle and deeply unsustainable.
Fickle, yeah.
It relies on the dopaminergic reward prediction error. You expect the external reward, the compliment, the number on the scale, to make you feel a certain level of satisfaction. But the moment you achieve the goal, the reward loses its potency. The wedding passes.
Or worse, the changes don't happen fast enough, right?
Exactly. And the moment the external reward is removed or delayed, the friction of the effort becomes intolerable and the behavior entirely collapses. You quit.
Because you're basically renting your motivation from an outside source.
Yes.
Yeah.
You must transition to intrinsic motivation. This is the drive coming from within. You do it because it feels good, it relieves stress, you enjoy the challenge itself.
The activity stops being the toll you pay and becomes the reward itself.
Exactly. And when you tap into intrinsic motivation, adherence becomes effortless. It shifts from a chore on a to-do list to a non-negotiable part of your identity. You are simply an athlete.
So what does this all mean? It means true fitness is a shift from I have to do this to I get to do this. But let me ask you this. How does this prove that discipline is actually born of self-respect rather than self-punishment? Because we culturally celebrate this idea of hardcore punishing discipline, grind through the weakness.
Right. The grind culture discipline is punitive. It relies on shame. If I don't work out today, I am lazy. True. Sustainable discipline is born of deep self-respect. It's the recognition that you are the steward of an incredibly complex biological machine.
Stewardship.
Yes. You train on the days you don't want to because you respect your future self too much to let the machinery degrade. Fitness becomes biological hygiene.
Biological hygiene. I love that. Okay, so once you have the internal motivation to stick with it, you need to apply your efforts intelligently so you don't burn out. This brings us from philosophy to intelligent design, Section 6. From working out to programming.
Yes, this is a crucial transition.
Because there's a huge pitfall here. Getting inspired, doing random gym sessions, trying random exercises until you're exhausted, and then just hitting a wall.
Right. While any movement is better than none, random inputs guarantee burnout.
So what's the alternative?
The next level of thinking is programming. This means having a coherent, long-term structure. And the foundational science of programming is periodization.
Periodization. Walk us through that.
Periodization is the systematic planning of training over time by manipulating volume, intensity, and frequency.
Volume being the total amount of work, and intensity being the heaviness of the weight.
Exactly. And frequency is how often you train. You cannot push all three to their maximum simultaneously, or your nervous system will crash. So you structure them into specific cycles.
Okay, what do those cycles look like?
You have the macro cycle, which is the grand view, usually a yearly goal. Within that, you have mesocycles, which are 46-week blocks focused on a specific quality, like muscular hypertrophy or aerobic base.
And then the microcycle is the actual training week.
Yes, it's meticulously planned.
But within this elegant programming, there's a concept that highly motivated people absolutely despise. The deload week.
Ah, yes, the planned period of reduced intensity.
Because if you have built up all this intrinsic motivation, taking a week easy feels like a betrayal. People have this fear of resting.
This raises an important question. Why do we fear rest? Listeners likely fear that if they take a deload week, their muscles will deflate. But a deload is not a sign of weakness. It's a strategic recovery phase, allowing adaptation.
It's the planned step back that facilitates 2 steps forward.
Exactly. When you train intensely, you accumulate deep, hidden fatigue in your connective tissues and your central nervous system. A deload week drops the volume and intensity to let those slow healing systems catch up. It's when the body actually finalizes the adaptations.
I always compare programming without periodization or deloads to playing a symphony at maximum volume the entire time.
Oh, that's a great image.
Right. It just becomes exhausting noise. You need the quiet movements, the deloads, to make the crescendos and the progress actually impactful.
The contrast creates the adaptation.
Which perfectly transitions us into Section 7, the unsung heroes, nutrition and recovery. Because you can have perfect programming, but if you ignore the raw materials and the biological environment outside the gym, it collapses.
This is where the actual alchemy happens.
Let's start with nutrition. Now, we aren't prescribing a specific diet. We aren't getting into keto versus vegan. But we must provide the critical framework.
Right, the fundamental cellular building blocks. We're talking macronutrients, proteins, carbs, and fats, which provide the building blocks and energy.
And micronutrients.
Yes, vitamins and minerals, which are the chemical keys that unlock the cellular machinery.
So the goal is to ignore fad diets and ask one essential question. Is this efficacious, meaning effective, and evidence-based for my specific goals?
Exactly. Form must follow function.
But even with perfect nutrition, we have to talk about recovery and the nervous system. Because you're about to drop a massive truth bomb here.
I am. The truth is, you do not get stronger in the gym.
Wait, say that again?
You do not get stronger in the gym. The workout is a catabolic event. You are breaking tissue down. You get stronger during the rest after the gym. And this is governed by the autonomic nervous system.
The tug of war between 2 different modes.
Yes. On one side, the sympathetic nervous system. This is your fight or flight state. Strenuous exercise forces you deep into a sympathetic state.
You're chemically mimicking a survival scenario.
Right. On the other side is the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state. This is where your heart rate slows and cellular repair actually happens.
But modern life keeps us chronically trapped in the sympathetic state. We do a brutal workout, drink coffee, commute in traffic, deal with work stress.
Exactly. And your body will not prioritize synthesizing new muscle if it believes it's in a survival crisis. You have to forcibly shift your body back to the parasympathetic state using sleep, meditation, and gentle stretching.
Which makes athletes who stall out reevaluate everything. You say they aren't usually overtrained, they're under-recovered.
Almost always.
If sleep is our most potent recovery tool, why do we culturally glorify the hustle of sacrificing sleep for more gym time when the science says it's entirely counterproductive?
It's a profound lack of biological understanding. Cutting sleep amputates your body's primary repair window.
It's literally self-destructive. Okay, so let's say the listener dials in their recovery, their programming, everything. Eventually the progress will still stop. Which brings us to our final section. Solving the homeostasis puzzle, or breaking through plateaus without using brute force.
The plateau, everyone hates it, but only because we misunderstand what it represents.
So define homeostasis for us.
Homeostasis is the body's tendency to seek and maintain balance and equilibrium. The body despises change because it costs energy.
Right.
So a plateau isn't a failure. It is simply the body successfully reaching homeostasis based on your current inputs. It has solved the puzzle you gave it.
That is such a liberating reframe. This means a plateau is merely a data point. It's a signal that a variable must change. You increase intensity, adjust nutrition, or double down on recovery.
Exactly. You observe the data without emotion and adjust.
I always compare a plateau to a locked door. Instead of bashing your head against it using brute force and overtraining, you just need to try a different key by changing a variable.
Replacing ego with curiosity, brute force will break the organism.
And that really synthesizes our entire deep dive today. The fitness journey is ultimately a journey of self-knowledge.
It truly is.
It starts with simple action, evolves into a complex philosophy, and matures into intelligent scientific application. The goal is to become the scientist of your own body.
The chief scientist of your own physiology.
Now, before we sign off, I want to leave you, the listener, with a final provocative thought to ponder. We spent this entire deep dive discussing how physical homeostasis creates fitness plateaus that require a progressive overload of stress to overcome.
Right.
But what if this exact same biological principle applies to our minds? Could the comfort zones in your career, your creative pursuits, or your relationships be a form of psychological homeostasis?
Oh, wow.
Right? And if so, what kind of progressive overload do you need to program into your life to trigger your next phase of mental growth?
That is a phenomenal concept to reflect on. The biology always mirrors the psychology.
It really does. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Take these insights into your week, and we'll see you next time.